All right, so it is Monday and it is 7 o'clock. This is our first Model Monday when we're back in person. We're actually at the Milwaukee Makerspace, which is fantastic. I'm glad to be here. I got a couple people joining me live. We got some folks joining us on the interweb. And we were just talking about how, some people are going to watch this recording after the fact. So if you're here live or if you're joining us in the chat, as we go through the project for the day, feel free to pop up with any questions you have. Stop me and I will 100% ask them. That's the benefit of joining live and not watching the recording later, is you can ask questions, which is wonderful. And what this place is all about, learning stuff and asking questions. So today our project is going to be a fairly simple box. So we're going to make a nice wooden box. PiDay is coming up on March 14th, and I like to take pie places and share it with people, and I need a box in order to take that pie places. So I made one. Of course, I designed it here in Fusion, and in order to make it in the wood shop, we've got drawing files here that I generated so I can actually make this thing physically. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Let's probably save that. All right. I'm going to close both of these files here, and I'm going to start a brand new design. And this new design is going to be our box. So my approach for this box is going to be parameter based. So I like doing these kind of parameter based projects because for a box, you can put anything in a box, literally. So I'm going to think about this as a box that you can put anything in if you know what size that item is. So instead of starting by drawing things, we're going to start by setting some parameters for what's going to go inside of our box. And then all of our box dimensions will be determined by those parameters that we set. So I'm going to start by clicking on Modify and then coming down to this Change Parameters option. So normally when we draw things, we say, hey, let's make a rectangle, and then we tell the rectangle how big we want that to be in inches or millimeters or whatever. In this case, we are going to type in a user parameter for a dimension. So I'm going to create those user parameters now just by clicking on this user parameter plus button here. And now I can give my user parameter a name. So we're going to have a material that we're making this out of. And that material is going to have a thickness. So this first parameter I'm going to call material thickness. I'm going to be using inches. My brain tends to work in inches because I'm from America, Jack. If you're from, I don't know, anywhere else, literally anywhere else in the world, feel free to use millimeters. But I'm going to go with the expression of 3/8. Seems like a good thickness of material to make this box out of. And then I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to do that 3 more times. So now I'm going to have a user parameter that specifies a height and a width and a length as well. So my box will have a height, a length, and a width of the object that I'm putting inside of this box. So my height for pie, I think a good height is like 5 inches. Want to have a nice thick pie. I'm going to do another user parameter that is my length. And maybe a pie is like 14 inches wide. But again, the beauty of these parameters is if you specify and then a width, if we do this work ahead of time, my width is also going to be 14 inches. Now it's easy to change these parameters and alter our box to fit whatever we want to put in it. So if you got a mug or a coffee grinder or a water bottle or a cell phone or whatever you want to put in your box, you can measure that object. You can enter those parameters here for height, length, and width. Specify the thickness of the material you're making here, and it will just go ahead and alter that box for you. And we'll test that at the end of this class, I think. Does everybody have those 4 parameters dialed in? You guys good at home too? All right, cool. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now we can put those parameters to work. So from our Create menu, actually, before we go ahead, yes, from our Create menu, let's go ahead and choose the box option. A lot of times we start by creating a sketch, but I think in this case it's just easiest just to start with a box. Now our box, even though it's a 3-dimensional object, we need to start with a 2-dimensional surface to create the first measurements for our box on. This is a little counterintuitive, but you just need to specify one of these 3 drawing surfaces to start your box on here. And it doesn't really matter which one at all. I'm going to choose this surface that is my top here. So if I want to make sure I choose the top, I can click on the top over here in my navigation cube, and then I'll just spin down so I'm looking straight at it. And now I won't accidentally click on a different plane here. The beautiful thing about Fusion is it gives you lots of tooltips. So if I'm ever unsure what to do, if I just stop moving my mouse, it'll tell me here. So right now it says place first corner. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to place the first corner right at the center of where the X and the Y axis meet there. That is the origin. And I'm just moving my mouse out. It's not a click and drag, but it's a click and move. Now I always encourage people, once they see numbers, they should type numbers. So let go of your mouse and just start typing things. And we could type in like 12 inches, for example. However, we spent all that work defining parameters. So I can define, if I start typing in length there, you can see my length, any parameter that's got an L in it, apparently, will just pop up there. So length is the one. Actually, I'm going to make this my width. Oh, did I mess you up, Mike? All right, so width, and then I'm going to hit the tab key to bounce over my other measurement, and length is going to be my other measurement. Really, these are interchangeable because they're the same units right now, but all right, and now we've got our length and our width specified there, and if I click, now it gives me my box window finally. And if I navigate my navigation cube in that top right hand corner and zoom out and zoom in so we can see this a little bit more 3-dimensionally, now you can see I've got a height measurement that I can enter in here, and that height measurement is going to be my user parameter that I created that's called height. Now it goes ahead and converts some of these user measurements for you right away, but I can go ahead and change these so just so you're sure that I entered in length, width, and height. Those are those user parameters that I created for my length, width, and height of my object. In this case, nice delicious pie. So once we've got those 3 measurements in, I can go ahead and say OK. All right, so we've got a box here. We've got a cube, I suppose you could say. Does a cube have to have equal sides? Anyway, regardless, we've got a 3-dimensional object here. And in order to make our 3-dimensional object hollow, like a box is, we can use the shell command. So there is a single command in the modify menu that will take this box, this cube, and make it hollow. So if I click on modify and then come down to this shell option, now I could specify one of these faces, and that would make kind of like an open box, but I want to have a closed box here. So instead of specifying one of the faces, I'm going to specify the body that I want to make a shell of. So in my bodies folder over here in my browser on the left hand side of the screen, if I spin down my bodies folder, I got a body inside of that, and if I hover over it and click on it, it'll choose that body in my shell window here. And now I can specify a direction. In our case, this is going to be outside. So we specified the dimensions of the object that we want to put in a box. Like I said, in our case, pi. And so we want to make a shell that extends outside of that space. And our thickness, the outside thickness, is going to be what I call the user parameter that I called material thickness. And you can see if I change this from inside to outside, the change that happens there. So either that's building the walls inside of that space, or it's building the walls outside of that space. And then I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Alright, I always encourage people to name things as they go. So I've got a body here in my bodies folder, and I'm going to call it box. In order to rename things in your folders, if you click on them one time and kind of pause and click on them a second time, so it's not a double click, it's a click, pause, and click, then you can specify whatever name makes sense in your brain hole to name things. Now, right now, you just kind of have to take my word for it that this is a hollow object. Because we don't have any openings, you kind of have to take my word that it is indeed hollow on the inside. And I can prove that to you in a couple of steps here. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to split our box into a top and a bottom. So I'm going to come up here to my construct menu, and I'm going to construct an offset plane. So a plane is an invisible piece of paper, let's say, that you can specify in space, and then on that invisible piece of paper you can draw sketches on it. You can use it to cut bodies, which is what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that offset plane option. I'm going to specify either the top of my box or the bottom of my box. Either one is fine. If I click on the top here, you can see I've got a little arrow, and I can click and drag on that arrow and I can move it in some direction. So if I go down like -1.5 inches, seems like a good box lid. Positive 1.5 inches will bring, for me, this plane up. However, sometimes negative and positive in Fusion is different for different users. So the key is we want our plane, you can see it slicing, intersecting with our three-dimensional object. So that's what we want here. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now I've got a construction folder that's appeared over here in my browser on the left, and in that we've got a plane. That plane, I want to go ahead and name that. This is going to be our cutting plane, Sure. So that's the plane that we're going to use to cut our box up. And I'm going to do that right meow. So in the modify menu, I'm going to come up to the split body option. And the body that I'm going to choose to split, I can either click on here in my drawing view, so I can click on my box in my drawing view, or I can click on it in my browser. So this is a great reason to name your bodies in your bodies folder, so it's easy to select them if you know what they're called. I'm going to choose my splitting tool here in my split body window. And again, here I can either do that by clicking on the plane here in my drawing view. However, sometimes it's difficult to see the plane, or your plane might be kind of small, so you can also click on the plane in your construction folder. You can see it's made a little red indication of the part of the box it's going to cut up. And I'm just going to say OK. Alright, we're done with that construction plane, so I don't need to look at it anymore. I'm going to go ahead and hide it just so it gets rid of some visual clutter on my screen here. And now we can see instead of one body in our bodies folder, we have two of them. And if I hover over them, they kind of highlight, right? So I can see that I've got a top and a bottom. And the same way we just turned off the construction plane by clicking on the little eyeball, I can turn off the top of my box. And now I can finally prove to you that my box is totally hollow on the inside. It is indeed a box. Alright, so normally, I guess for normal construction, we don't need to do this. Maybe I should talk about a little housekeeping or organization while we're here. So, because we got some new people. Am I going too fast for anybody? Are you guys all keeping up? Keeping up? All right. Cool. Good, good. So, Fusion organizes things by components. And then inside of components are bodies and sketches and construction planes. So, right now, over here in my browser, you can see I've got one component. This component is called unsaved because I have not saved it. You should probably, you know what? Let's save it right now. There's always a good time to save, right? So I'm just going to click on the little floppy disk icon. Everybody will recognize that big 5-inch floppy disk up in the top left-hand corner. I'm going to call this a PiBox. And I have already created a project called PiBox. So I encourage people to start a new project. So you can click on New Project, and then you can name that project something. And now you can click on that project that you just made over here, this something project, and then you can say save. And it will save this document inside of your something project. I'm going to save it in my PiBox project here that I created earlier. So now you can see we've got one component. That component has a couple of bodies in it, and it's got a construction plane in it. What's that? Oh, okay, sorry. All right. So the speaker is kind of like in the middle of the room. So every once in a while I hear something and I'm like, oh, does somebody have a question? All right. So we've got two bodies here, and I'd like to take these two bodies and turn them into components. Because what I eventually want to do is I want to add a joint. And in order to add a joint, you have to have more than one component because you make two components work together in your joint. So what I need to do is I need to take these bodies and convert them into components. And the way that we convert a body into a component is from the Create menu. I can come down here to the New Component option, which is the very top option. And instead of making, like, a lot of times we'll just make a brand new component and then we'll start creating sketches inside of that component. Here we've already got bodies made for us, so I'm going to choose the From Bodies option here. This little checkbox that says From Bodies. And now I can click on the two bodies that I want to turn into components and then say OK. So now it took that bodies folder in my kind of main document component here and split it up into two components down here. And the same way I renamed my bodies, I can name these components. So I've got a component that is the bottom, and then I've got a component that is the top. All right, so I'm going to turn off the visibility on my top component, just so I'm looking at just the bottom. So right now, this body is all made of like one piece, and that's not how wood works. So what we'll need here is to break this up into panels. And I think the best way to do this is with the tool that we just used. We used the split body tool in order to split a body into one body into multiple bodies here. And we can do that again to create the various sides of our boxes here. So from the Modify menu, I can choose that split body option. I'm going to spin around just for my own sanity. So I'm looking at the front. So this is the front as labeled here by Fusion 360. And I'm going to specify the body that I want to split. So I can either, like I said, do that in the drawing view, or I can do it in my bodies folder over here. Oh, you know what? I may have gotten ahead of myself. Did that work? Oh, it did. I'm actually surprised that worked. So as a best practice, let me redo that. As best practice, so we just had one component initially when we started doing this drawing, right? We just had our one document component here. Now we made components from bodies, so now we have several other components here. And as kind of a best practice, what we should be doing here is making the component that we're working on active, and then doing anything we want to do inside of that. So in order to make a component active, you can see this little radio button is clicked here on the main document component. Because I'm working on my bottom component right now, best practice would be to make that my active component by clicking the little radio button next to it. If I turn my top visibility of my top component back on, you can see it's kind of ghosted out here. And that's how you know you've got a component active, is other components kind of become ghostly images of themselves. The reason we do that is if we're creating a sketch, it's going to make sure it creates it inside of the sketches folder inside of our active component. Or if we're making a plane, it's going to create it inside of your active component. Sometimes when you're extruding something, it'll extrude it into your active component. So I'm actually surprised it worked the way I did it before. But best practice would be to check that little radio button. And now I'm going to go to that split body again. I'm going to choose the body that I'm going to split. Oh, I picked the wrong option. Modify, split body. and I'm going to pick the inside back face of my box, and I'm going to spin around and pick the opposite face over here. So I'm going to split those two sides off. Sorry, the front and the back, not the two sides. And I'm going to say OK. So now you can see my number of components, or my number of bodies over here, has gone up. I now have 3. And I'm going to do that one more time. So I'm going to come up to the Modify menu, choose to split a body. The body that I'm going to split is, I guess, this guy right here. That you can see if I spin this around here, it spans those two sides. And the splitting tools are going to be, again, those inside faces. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now, instead of one body, I've got 5 that represent each of the faces of my box. And I could turn off the visibility, and now we can see that this is a thing that we can actually generate measurements for, and take measurements of, and go and make for real. You know, I would normally recommend spending time to name these things, but for the interest of time here in class, I'm going to skip naming them. Like, for example, this would be my bottom, and this would be my bottom. I guess that's my left. So I would go through and make sure to name those things, so they all have unique names. Just best practice. But for right now, I'm just going to close down my bodies folder, because I want to do that exact same procedure on my top. So if I turn the visibility on my top on there, and then make my top my active component, I'll turn off the visibility on my bottom, and now I can look in the inside of that. And then again, we want to do those exact same procedures here. So splitting those side walls off. So from the Modify menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose to split body. The body that I'm going to split is my box body that's in my top component. And then I'm going to split the front and back off first. So I'll spin that around and click on those inside faces for the front and back of my box top. And I'll say OK. And then I'm going to do that one more time. Modify, split body. I'll specify this 3-sided object here. And the splitting tools, again, are going to be those inside faces. And I'm going to say OK. All right, cool. So we have got our box here. I'm going to close down my bodies folder here just by spinning this little triangle. You can hide or show the contents of that folder. I'll turn back on my visibility on my bottom component. And now I'm going to make my PiBox main document component, my active component. And that way we can see everything here. So we can see we've got a box. Now, I'd like to, just for fun, animate the opening and closing of this box, just because it's a fairly simple procedure. So, and the whole reason we had separate components is so I could show you how you can add some animation to your models here in Fusion. So I've got my main document component as my active component, and that's important because when we come here to the Assemble menu, and we choose the as-built joint option, it'll make that joint inside of my main document as opposed to inside of one of these in my top or my bottom component. So I'll go ahead and choose this as-built joint. Now the joint type that I'm going to make here is a revolute joint. Yours may default to rigid, and you can see that there are many types of joints that we can make, but we're going to choose to make a revolute joint. And we're going to choose the components now that are going to be making up that joint. As a rule of thumb, when you're making joints, the first item you click on is the thing that's going to do the moving. So if I were to click on the bottom of my box first, and then the top of my box, when I move that joint, the bottom of my box is going to be the one moving. And that probably doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess it does because there's no table here in this case, but we're going to click on the top component first, just so it looks a little bit better visually. And then I'll click on my bottom component second. And now the last thing that it wants us to do here is choose a what it calls a snap. So this is the axis that it's going to rotate on. I'm going to spin around so I can see the back of my box here. And as the axis that I'm choosing, I'm going to choose this line that splits my two bodies in half, my two components in half there. And if I click on that line, then it'll give me an animation where it bends the box through the fourth dimension, apparently, and shows you what that joint does. I just click this animate thing here, this animate play button, and it'll animate that joint and show it to you. Alright, I'm going to say OK here because that is kind of what I wanted to do. Did you guys figure out, did you get your joint working at home? I mean, it's none of my business if you got your joint working at home. If you're joining me from like Michigan or Illinois or like Colorado, but if you got your joint moving in Fusion, hopefully. All right, cool.
The joint on my box works.
Sweet. All right. So, our joint works, but let's do one more thing just for fun here. Is I can do things to my joint that defy, I don't know, let's say the laws of thermodynamics. So I'd like to fix that. And in order to do that, we're going to set some minimum and maximum points on our joint here. So in the joints folder over in our browser, I can spin down that little triangle. I can see this revolute joint here, and if I hover over it, there's a little orange button that pops up next to it that is Edit Joint Limits. And if I click on that, I can set a minimum and a maximum, and I'm going to do that. So the minimum is fine where it's at. The maximum, the minimum is good there. It's just this guy. Maybe, let's make it 100 degrees or so, just so there's something there. Obviously, I guess it could go further. It could go, I mean, in reality, we'll have a hinge here somewhere, right? So if I set those minimum and maximums, now it won't let me bend the box through the fourth dimension. It will only go to those couple of points there. All right. So I'm going to say OK here. Now the last part of class here that I want to focus on is like making this real. So this is Makerspace. We actually like to make physical things here. It's a wonderful thing. And in order to make this real, I want to be able to take this into the wood shop but I don't want to have my laptop in here. I want to have like a piece of paper so I'm not getting sawdust all over my laptop. I hate it when that happens. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file here. Just go ahead and Command S, Control S, or hit the little floppy disk icon up here in the top. And now to create a drawing from this file, if I click on the File menu, the fourth option says New Drawing. And we're going to make a new drawing from Design. So we're going to make a new drawing, and the drawing refers to a piece of paper that's got dimensions on it. We get a little Create Drawing window that pops up here. And I can specify that I'm going to be printing this out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And I can say OK. So that's going to open up a new tab here. And now it's given me an object to place. So this is apparently the front of my box here. So if I place this, if I just click to place that down here, now I can specify the scale and some more specific things here. So, you know, I worked for a blacksmith for a little bit during the pandemic here, and he turned me on to like scale. So 1 to 8 means nothing to me. It really makes more sense to have a scale that is inches to feet, right? So, because you should be able to walk up to your drawing with a ruler and measure something and go, oh, now I can convert that to how big it is in the real world. So, in theory, you can do that if you use these kind of inch measurements down here. So, like, if I say 1.5 inches equals a foot, now it didn't really change that much, but here, let's make it something. If I say 1 inch equals a foot, now if I measure this after I print it out and something measures an inch, I know that that's a foot in real world. So it makes much more sense to me to use these kind of measurements. So I'm going to do this 1.5 option because it. Maybe I can do 3. Can I do 3 and still fit it on the page? Probably not. I'm gonna do 1.5. I can specify what face or what side I'm showing here. For our case, I think front is the right way to go here. And I can specify how I want that to be visible. So I can show it shaded. I could just show the outside lines. I could show so it shows through the box. To any invisible lines that might be hidden on the back side of our object. But I'm just going to choose this first option. If I just stop moving my mouse, it'll probably tell me what that's called. Visible edges. Alright, and then I'm going to say OK here. Now it's placed that box, and I can click and move this anywhere here. But this would be really helpful if I could see the top and the side of my box as well. So I can do that by creating projected views. So in my Create menu here in the drawing world, I can say Projected View. And now I'm going to select the parent view, which is that object that I placed there. And now you can see if I move my mouse off to the side, if I move it directly off to the side, I get the side view of my PiBox. If I move it directly up above, I get like a top down. And if I move it kind of off at an angle here, I get an isomorphic kind of view here. So I'm going to click and I'm going to place a top view. So I've got that there. And I'm going to go over here and click and place a side view directly along the side of it. And now I'm just going to hit the escape key because I'm done placing those views. So I'm going to zoom in here because I realize it's a little bit difficult to see on the screen. But now you can see I've got these drawings here. And now the real key here is to place some measurements so you know how big these things are. So if I, from my dimensions menu, choose the dimension option, I can hover over any line segment, and if I click on it one time and now move my mouse out, now I can place that measurement. As a point of note, in the browser here in your drawing view, I think it's in sheet settings. No, is it document settings? Yes. All right, so in the document settings, if you come over here to dimensions, units, inches, and click on the little button that pops up to the right of that text, you get a document settings window here, and I can specify how many decimal places I want to see shown there, so the precision that it shows. I can also change this from decimal to fractional. Sometimes when you're, like doing stuff in the wood shop, it makes sense to talk about fractions. If you're doing stuff in the machine shop, maybe it makes sense to talk about decimals, depending on how precise you're getting. But here, because this is a wood shop thing, I'm going to turn this to fractional, and maybe I'll make the precision like a 1/16 of an inch there. And then I'm going to say OK. So then it goes ahead and converts that to the fractional measurement. So I'm going to go ahead and place some more dimensions here. So I'm going to place dimensions for how big I'm going to need, how wide I'm going to need to cut each of these boards. So there's a 4 1/4 measurement. I don't have to get my dimension tool every time I place a dimension, so I can just kind of keep going here and place all of the dimensions for my drawing. I've got some measurements over here, so while that's 14 3/4, this board is only going to be 14. However, the heights of these you'll find will be the same. In addition to clicking on a line segment in order to specify a length, I can also specify 2 points. So I can click on the first point and then click on the second point and then move my mouse out to place that dimension. I'm going to do that for the top here as well, even though these measurements are going to be exactly the same as my first 2 measurements. I've been told by people that there's a specific way you're supposed to make this drawing. In fact, if there's anybody who knows a specific way that these drawings are supposed to be made, I only know a couple rules of thumb. So the rules of thumb that I've been told are your dimensions should always go the same way. So if my dimensions always go to the right and the bottom on all of my measurements, they should go to the right and the bottom on all of my views here. I shouldn't have dimensions that randomly come off to the other side on both sides of an object. I don't know why that's true, but maybe it just makes it more legible. In any case, so rule of thumb there. And then the last thing that I'm going to do here is kind of an option thing. I like to have a 3-dimensional view of the object that I'm making here on my drawing. So from the Create menu, I'm just going to come up and make a new base view. And that base view, I'm going to change that orientation so it's one of these kind of isometric from the top kind of things. And I'll click and place that. And I'm going to make that the same scale as I made the first base view, just because you probably shouldn't have multiple scales on one drawing. That's just bad practice. And this time I'm going to choose to make it a shaded style. And I'll say OK. And there we go. Now we've got our drawing. So we've got 10 minutes left. And with that 10 minutes, I want to show you kind of why we started. Let me save this. Saving is good. Saving my PiBox drawing. I'm saving it in my PiBox project here. Alright, so now if I go back to my original drawing, we started with making parameters, and now let's say I've got a whole new object. So if I come up here to modify and change parameters, like, hey, it's not PiDay anymore, now it's Cupcake Day. So if we want to make our box fit a cupcake, make a box for a cupcake, we could do that. A cupcake is much smaller. Let's say it's 6 inches by 6 inches, and it's a real tall cupcake for whatever reason, because, I don't know, it's got a candle on it. It's 8 inches tall, and there's no need to make it out of 3/8 material. Let's make it out of 1/4 inch material, because it's only a cupcake. It's not like it's important. So then I'm going to say OK, and you can see that it has gone ahead and changed my box. It's made it a box for a whole different thing. In fact, my joint even worked, which is kind of cool. And not only that, but if I save this and I come back to my drawing, I've got a little updated, I've got a little, I don't know, warning, let's call it. I guess it's a warning. If I click on this warning up in my top, it updates everything in my drawing, which is super cool. These drawings are linked. Now I do have to move some of these measurements out for some reason. They hovered over there. And, you know, we could change the scale here now because we can afford to make these bigger. This could probably be 3 inches equals a foot now, or even more. But that's kind of the main reason for like using those parameters, is now this can be a box for anything. It doesn't have to be just a PiBox. It could be a gift box for whatever you're making. As just kind of a last bonus here, from the Modify menu, if I come down and choose this Appearance option, this is something I've been doing more and more in class. Sometimes it's nice to, like, we talk a lot about organization of folders and components here in class, but it's also nice to organize things visually. And I organize things visually in my drawings by adding material appearances here. So if I find like this cherry, this nice cherry, I can click and drag this out over my bodies. You know, I think I can drag it on the components over here too, and then it'll color all the bodies in that component, so I don't have to drag them out on each individual body. So now I've got a nice cherry box here. And if I save this, because in my drawing view I chose to make this a shaded base object here, if I update my drawing, it updates with those materials applied to it. Cool. So that's it. That's our PiBox. I'm going to change my user parameters back here because I can. That's 5, and this is like 14. That was like 14, and this is a 3/8 inch box there. And just like that, we got our box back. Does anybody have any questions? Did you guys follow along all right? Cool. And feel free to shoot me an email or reach out to me on the message board if you guys are like doing this after the fact and you come up on a snagging point, or like next week, if you go through this project and you join us again next week and you have questions, you can always pop on a little early, and I'll try to answer those questions kind of before we get started. Yeah, you know what? I will say, I forgot. Next week, we will not be having a class. Next week, we have an area champions meeting that takes place at 7 o'clock. And I'm a area co-champion, so I'd like to attend that. So next week, we will not be having a class. But the week after that is actually PiDay. So I will probably bring pie. So if you're...
Well, what good does that do us on the internet?
Well, I can like chat you pie. I can send you pie emojis. You could buy your own pie and like join and virtually pie with me.
I'm gonna do that.
Okay, good, excellent. And you could share it with your girlfriend. I'm sure she wouldn't mind either. Excellent. Yeah, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. All right.
Are you normally at Makerspace now?
Yeah, so now that, we had been doing this virtually.